Hi there, welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're diving into the sticky, sweet, and surprisingly violent story of how medieval Europe discovered junk food. You're standing in a drafty castle kitchen in 1095, gnawing on a piece of bread so hard it could double as a weapon, when suddenly a knight burst through the door, his saddlebags bulging with mysterious white crystals that taste like heaven itself. Little do you know, this moment will transform European cuisine forever, though you probably won't survive the tooth decay that's coming. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, close your eyes and listen. You've been eating the same meals your entire life, every single day. Your breakfast is porridge, if you're lucky. It's made with barley instead of just water, and whatever grains didn't rot. Lunch, more porridge, maybe with a turnip thrown in for excitement. Dinner brings the grand finale. Bread that could crack teeth, washed down with ale that tastes like someone forgot to clean the barrel. Your tongue has experienced exactly 4 flavors: bland, bitter, sour, and, is this spoiled? The year is 1095, and Pope Urban II has just called for the First Crusade. You don't care much about reclaiming the Holy Land. You can barely reclaim your own plot from the Lord's tax collectors. But when recruiters promise adventure and heavenly rewards, you figure anything beats another winter of eating preserved cabbage that smells like feet. Historians still argue whether more peasants joined for religious fervor or simply to escape turnip-based cuisine. You watch as knights prepare for the journey, their armor gleaming while you're handed a wooden spoon that's supposedly your weapon. The irony isn't lost on you. You're about to march thousands of miles to fight for a religion that keeps telling you suffering is good for the soul. Your stomach growls in disagreement. Someone mentions there's food in the East, real food, the kind that doesn't require you to soak it in water for 3 days before your teeth can penetrate it. The recruiting sergeant promises wealth beyond imagination. You've heard these promises before. Usually right before someone asks you to pay more taxes. But this time, something feels different. Returning merchants whisper about markets in Constantinople, where vendors sell sweet treats that melt on your tongue, where spices make even rotten meat taste divine. Your mouth waters at the thought, though you're not entirely sure what sweet means beyond honey from that one time you got stung stealing from a hive. As you join the growing crowd of would-be crusaders, you notice the social divide immediately. Noble knights pack preserved meats and dried fruits, while you're handed a bag of grain that's already showing signs of weevils. Someone jokes that the bugs add protein, medieval dark humor at its finest. But you're not discouraged. You've survived on tree bark soup during bad harvests. Whatever awaits in the Holy Land can't be worse than another meal of boiled leather. Yes, that's a thing you've eaten. The preparation phase reveals the shocking state of European cuisine. You watch cooks try to preserve food for the journey using methods that would horrify modern health inspectors. Salt is precious. So most preservation involves smoking meat until it resembles charcoal, or letting things ferment until they're technically alcohol. One knight brags about his special travel bread, baked so hard it can last for years. You tap it against a rock, the rock chips. Your fellow crusaders share their own food horror stories. There's the merchant who claims he once ate shoe leather soup for a month. The blacksmith swears he's seen people grinding acorns into flour. Everyone agrees that whoever invented pottage, that eternal pot of whatever's available, never fully cleaned, just eternally added to, deserves their own special circle in hell. You're beginning to understand why gluttony is considered a sin. In medieval Europe, there's literally nothing worth being gluttonous about. The irony of marching to the Holy Land hits you as you prepare your meager rations. Here you are, about to travel to the birthplace of milk and honey, literally mentioned in the Bible as a land of abundance, while sucking on a piece of salted fish that tastes like concentrated sadness. Your priest insists suffering brings you closer to God. Your stomach suggests God might appreciate you more with a full belly. The march begins, and within 3 days you realize why nobody writes romantic ballads about walking to Jerusalem. Your feet are already bleeding through rags you've wrapped around them. Shoes are for people who own land. But as you trudge through Hungary, something magical happens. Local merchants approach your ragtag army with foods you've never seen. Round, flat breads with seeds on top. Preserved fruits that don't taste like punishment. Your first glimpse that maybe, just maybe, food exists beyond survival mode. You reach Constantinople, and your mind essentially explodes. The markets stretch forever, filled with scents that make your primitive European nose go into overdrive. A vendor holds out something called a date. It looks like a dried beetle, but when you bite into it, sweetness floods your mouth. Actual sweetness. Not the, well, it's not actively rotting sweetness you're used to, but something that makes your teeth ache in the most wonderful way. You immediately eat 17 more and spend the next day discovering that too much of a good thing exists even in paradise. The other crusaders are equally overwhelmed. You watch a knight from Normandy bite into a preserved lemon, and his face goes through all 5 stages of grief before settling on confused acceptance. Someone else discovers pistachios and refuses to believe they're food. Surely these green things are decorative. The Byzantines watch you all with barely concealed amusement, the way you'd watch toddlers discover that spoons exist. They've been eating actual food while you've been gnawing on turnips like disappointed rabbits. Your first encounter with sugar happens by accident. A Byzantine merchant takes pity on your group and offers what he calls candied ginger. You assume candied means burnt because that's the only flavor enhancement you know. Then it hits your tongue, a shocking sweetness combined with spicy heat that makes your eyes water. You genuinely believe you're having a religious experience. This must be what manna from heaven tasted like. Several crusaders actually kneel and pray, convinced they've tasted angel food. The real shock comes at a Byzantine feast where local Christians invite some crusaders to dine. You're served meat that isn't grey, vegetables that have colour beyond mud. They bring out something called rice, cooked with saffron, and you spend 10 minutes just staring at it, because food isn't supposed to be yellow unless it's gone very, very wrong. When they serve lamb cooked with apricots and almonds, you literally cry. Not metaphorically. Actual tears stream down your face as you realize you've been eating like a prison inmate your entire life. But the journey must continue, and you leave Constantinople with your worldview shattered and rebuilt around the concept that food can bring joy. As you march through Anatolia, reality hits hard. The Turks have burned fields and poisoned wells. You're back to eating leather and grass, but now it's worse because you know what you're missing. Historians still argue whether the First Crusade's high casualties came more from combat or from crusaders eating anything vaguely edible after their Constantinople food awakening, including some very questionable mushrooms. You reach Antioch after months of suffering, and the siege begins. Here's where things get properly medieval. You're starving again, but now you're starving with standards. Someone finds a rat and suggests eating it. Before Constantinople, you'd have fought for first bite. Now you all stare at it sadly, remembering candied ginger. A knight actually eulogizes the rat. He deserved butter and herbs, maybe a nice wine reduction. This is possibly history's first recorded food snobbery during starvation. Then comes the miracle, or disaster, depending on your teeth. The Crusaders finally break into Antioch and discover the Muslim garrison's food stores. Imagine starving for months, then suddenly finding rooms full of things you can't even identify. There's this white powder that locals call sukkar. Someone tastes it and nearly passes out from the sweetness overload. You find containers of thick, sweet syrup that makes honey look like amateur hour. Jars of preserved fruit swimming in more of that impossible sweetness. Your medieval European digestive system, accustomed to fermented cabbage and despair, simply cannot process this assault of flavor. The sugar binge that follows becomes legendary. Crusaders who've been rationing moldy bread suddenly have access to unlimited sweetness. You watch grown knights literally rolling on the ground, clutching their stomachs after eating their body weight in candied fruits. Someone discovers what happens when you eat an entire jar of date syrup. Let's just say the latrines are busy that night. But nobody stops, eh? After a lifetime of cuisine that tastes like penance, you're all making up for lost time with the determination of people who might die tomorrow. The morning after the great Antioch sugar binge, you discover consequences medieval bodies aren't prepared for. Half the army lies groaning, victims of history's first recorded mass sugar crash. But something extraordinary happens in the medical tents. You watch Saracen prisoners, now forced to serve as healers, do something unthinkable. They pack wounds with that white powder, the sukkar. Your fellow Crusaders protest, convinced the heathens are trying to poison injured Christians with dessert. Then the infections stop spreading. Wounds that would normally fester and stink start healing clean. Sugar, it turns out, isn't just a treat, it's medicine. You volunteer to help in the medical tents, mostly to stay close to the sugar supply. The Arab physicians treat you like a particularly dim child, but they teach you things that blow your medieval mind. Sugar mixed with egg white stops bleeding. Sugar boiled with water helps fevered patients. Sugar combined with various herbs creates medicines that actually work. Unlike your European method of bleeding people until they feel better or die, whichever comes first. One physician shows you how to preserve medicinal herbs in sugar syrup, creating potions that last months instead of days. The economics hit you like a Damascus steel sword. Back home, honey is precious enough, controlled by monasteries and lords, but sugar, this crystallized sunshine, 1 pound costs more than a warhorse. You watch merchants weigh it on scales used for gold, each grain counted like a tiny gemstone. The Venetian traders embedded with your army aren't here for God, they're here for the sweet, sweet profit margins. You overhear them calculating. Buy sugar here for 1 silver coin, sell in Venice for 20. Even your mathematically challenged medieval brain understands those numbers. Word spreads through the Crusader camps about sugar's magical properties. Knights start hoarding it more carefully than their swords. You witness the birth of medieval pharmaceutical fraud as enterprising soldiers grind white sand and salt, mixing it with real sugar to stretch their supply. The first taste test ends with someone spitting violently and threatening murder. But the scheme continues. Where there's profit, there's always someone willing to risk a sword to the gut. Your first encounter with sugar sculpture happens at a victory feast. Local Christian allies, wanting to impress the crude Frankish knights, bring out what looks like an edible castle complete with tiny knights. It's made entirely from sugar paste, painted with saffron and other expensive dyes. You touch it reverently, like a religious relic. The fact that you can eat art and that it tastes better than anything you've ever consumed seems like actual witchcraft. Several crusaders crossed themselves, unsure if admiring edible architecture counts as idolatry. The medical applications become increasingly creative. You help treat a knight's infected tooth by packing it with sugar and cloves. Another soldier swears sugar water cured his persistent cough. Someone discovers that sugar makes bitter medicines palatable. Revolutionary when most European medicine tastes like boiled sadness mixed with disappointment. The Arab physicians shake their heads at your enthusiasm, muttering about Frankish barbarians discovering what their civilization has known for centuries. But here's where class warfare enters the sugar story. Noble knights can afford to pack their wounds with pure sugar. You and the other common soldiers, you're lucky to lick the empty containers. You watch a baron's son receive sugar-preserved fruit to prevent scurvy while foot soldiers gnaw on leather straps. The medicinal sugar stays locked in chests, guarded more heavily than captured gold. Historians still argue whether more crusaders died from untreated wounds or from trying to steal medical sugar supplies. The sugar knowledge spreads through the army like a particularly sweet plague. You learn words that didn't exist in your vocabulary before. Crystallization, refinement, confection. A captured sugar merchant, bargaining for his life, teaches several knights the basics of sugar processing. You watch them take notes more carefully than they've ever studied scripture. One knight actually sketches a sugar mill, already planning his post-crusade business empire. The preservation properties astound everyone. Fruits that should rot in days last weeks when preserved in sugar syrup. Meat rubbed with sugar and spices doesn't spoil as quickly in the desert heat. Your medieval mind, accustomed to food lasting exactly as long as it takes to grow mold, can't process this information. Some crusaders become convinced sugar is literally a gift from God, sent to help Christians conquer the Holy Land. The theology gets weird when someone asks why God gave it to the Saracens first. Jerusalem falls to the Crusaders in 1099, and amid the chaos and carnage, you're part of a very different kind of looting. While others grab gold and jewels, you and the savvier knights head straight for the kitchens and storerooms. You discover the Fatimid governor's private sugar reserve, cone-shaped loaves wrapped in palm leaves, whiter than fresh snow. A Templar knight named Guillaume teaches you the smuggler's art. Hollow out bread loaves, stuff them with sugar and spices, seal with dough. Suddenly, everyone's a baker. You perfect the sugar smuggling technique over weeks of occupation. Almonds covered in sugar fit perfectly inside helmet padding. Candied citrus peel wraps around sword hilts under leather grips. One creative knight hollows out his wooden shield, creating a mobile candy vault. The irony isn't lost on you. Holy warriors of Christ transformed into confectionery mules. But when a single pound of sugar sells for enough silver to buy a small farm back home, religious devotion takes a backseat to economic opportunity. The Templar Knights, those supposed warrior monks, become the medieval equivalent of drug dealers but with sugar. You watch them develop elaborate codes: white gold for refined sugar, tears of Jerusalem for sugar syrup, Saracen snow for powdered sugar. They create the first international banking system partially to handle sugar profits without carrying suspicious quantities of silver. A Templar treasurer shows you ledgers where sugar transactions outnumber prayer bead sales 10 to 1. Your own smuggling operation starts small. You befriend a local Christian merchant who teaches you to identify quality sugar by color, texture, and taste. The purest sugar crunches between your teeth like tiny diamonds and dissolves completely, leaving no grit. Lesser grades have a yellow tinge and taste faintly of smoke. You learn to spot sugar cut with salt or ground marble. Yes, people are already creating fake drugs, but the drugs are candy. The logistics of sugar smuggling create hilarious situations. You witness a knight's horse collapse because its saddlebags contain 300 pounds of hidden sugar. Another crusader tries to board a ship wearing armor so stuffed with candied fruits he can't bend his arms. The Venetian ship captains charge by weight, not volume, so they quickly catch on. Suddenly, confession booths appear on ships where knights can unburden themselves of excess sugar for a modest fee. Competition turns violent. You see knights duel over sugar suppliers. A group of German crusaders forms a sugar cartel, trying to control prices by hoarding supply. They're broken up when French knights stage a midnight raid on their warehouse, leading to history's first recorded sugar gang war. The Bishop of Toulouse tries to restore order by declaring sugar smuggling a sin, then gets caught with 50 pounds of the stuff in his personal effects. The journey home becomes an exercise in paranoia. Every stop through Byzantine territory risks confiscation. The emperor's tax collectors know exactly what crusaders carry. You develop elaborate ruses. Knights pretend to be deathly ill. Their medicine chests, actually sugar stores. Others claim religious relics that absolutely cannot be opened or examined. One group stages an entire fake funeral procession. The coffin packed with preserved dates and candied ginger instead of a body. You personally witness the birth of medieval industrial espionage. A peasant merchant pays enormous bribes to learn sugar refining secrets. Knights torture captured sugar makers for recipes, not for military intelligence, but for candy-making techniques. You help guard a Syrian confectioner who's being transported to Venice, worth more than any ransom prisoner, because he knows how to make rose-flavored sugar sculptures. The smart smugglers diversify, along with sugar. You pack smaller quantities of equally valuable spices, pepper worth its weight in silver, cinnamon that sells for gold prices, cloves that European nobles will literally kill for. Your armor now smells like a spice market, which actually improves the typical crusader aroma of sweat, blood, and existential crisis. Historians still argue whether the Fourth Crusade's diversion to Constantinople was really about religion or just a massive sugar heist opportunity. Back through Anatolia, you face the eternal smuggler's dilemma: consume your profit or stay strong. Watching knights succumb to temptation becomes entertainment. One breaks after seeing his sugar supply but no food for 3 days. He eats merchandise worth a year's wages in one desperate binge. Another creates elaborate rationing systems, allowing himself exactly 1 candied almond per day, which he savors with religious devotion. You reach Venice in 1101, your armor stuffed with enough sugar to buy a small vineyard. The city's merchants swarm the returning crusaders like flies on honey, which, ironically, is about to become the poor man's sweetener once sugar hits the market. You watch as Venetian traders employ every trick. Pretty daughters suddenly need to inspect armor for damage. Moneylenders offer terrible rates for immediate coin. Customs officials develop very flexible interpretations of import duties, depending on bribe sizes. The Venetian sugar monopoly forms before your eyes. You're approached by men in expensive robes who make offers you can't refuse. Literally, they have armed guards. Sell to them exclusively, or find your sugar mysteriously contaminated and worthless. They organize the market with ruthless efficiency, sugar grades, standard weights, price fixing that would make modern cartels jealous. You learn a harsh lesson in medieval capitalism. Controlling supply matters more than owning it. Within months, Venice transforms into Europe's sugar hub. You find work in the new sugar warehouses, watching merchants create artificial scarcity. They release small amounts to keep prices astronomical while sitting on tonnage that could rot an entire city's teeth. The Doge himself invests heavily, using state funds to corner the market. When Genoan merchants try to break in with their own Jerusalem connections, mysterious fires destroy their warehouses. Nobody investigates too carefully. You witness the birth of medieval marketing. Venetian merchants don't just sell sugar, they sell the dream of sugar. They hire returned crusaders like you to tell tales in noble courts about sugar's magical properties. Embellish a little, they say. So you do. Sugar cures plague, it doesn't. Sugar makes women beautiful, debatable. Sugar improves virility, definitely doesn't. But desperate nobles believe anything. The stories get wilder with each telling, but the gold keeps flowing. The medical marketing proves most lucrative. You help a Venetian apothecary create the Riaca of Jerusalem, basically sugar mixed with random herbs and a tiny amount of opium. It sells for astronomical prices as a cure-all. Noble ladies buy complexion sugar mixed with rosewater. Knights purchase warrior strength sugar combined with questionable stimulants. Everyone knows it's mostly regular sugar, but the exotic names and crusader endorsements make people empty their purses. Class warfare erupts over sugar access. You watch common people riot when they realize the sweet paradise you've been describing costs more than their annual income. Let them eat honey, suggests one tone-deaf merchant, missing the point entirely. Black markets emerge. You recognize fellow crusaders now running sugar smuggling operations within Venice itself, selling fell-off-a-ship sugar in dark alleys. The authorities crack down hard. Sugar theft becomes punishable by hand removal, which seems excessive until you remember a pound costs more than a horse. The Venetian innovation machine kicks into overdrive. They develop new preservation methods, new packaging, new ways to cut sugar with cheaper substances without detection. You work in a facility where they experiment with sugar sculptures, creating elaborate displays for noble feasts. The first sugarwork guild forms, with apprenticeships more competitive than weaponsmithing. Master confectioners guard secrets like state intelligence, using codes and hidden workshops. Venice's sugar wealth creates ripple effects. The city builds new palaces funded entirely by sweet profits. Artists get commissioned to paint sugar banquet scenes. The church faces a theological crisis, is enjoying sugar gluttony. The Bishop of Venice, caught between condemning sin and enjoying sugar-funded donations, declares moderate sugar consumption acceptable if you pray between bites. Historians still argue whether the Venetian Renaissance was funded more by spices or sugar. The answer is probably both, with sugar taking the sweet lead. Your own role evolves from smuggler to middleman. You translate between Syrian sugar merchants and Venetian buyers, taking a cut from both sides. The linguistic confusion creates opportunities. When Arabs say sukar nabat, Venetians hear rock candy, and you charge extra for the exotic terminology. You develop a reputation for authenticating real Jerusalem sugar versus local attempts at replication. Your tongue, trained on years of turnip soup, can now distinguish Lebanese from Egyptian sugar by texture alone. The monopoly breeds corruption at every level. Venetian officials take bribes to overlook warehouse inspections. Ship captains declare partial cargo losses while selling the lost sugar privately. Even monastery kitchens get involved. with monks creating medicinal sugar preparations that accidentally taste delicious. You participate in this sweet corruption, skimming a little here, facilitating a deal there, always staying just ahead of the authorities who are usually in on the game anyway. The corruption reaches the monasteries, where you find yourself working as a medical consultant, medieval code for teaching monks to make candy. The abbot of San Giorgio claims all sugar work is purely medicinal, maintaining this fiction while his monks craft marzipan Virgin Marys that would make master sculptors weep. You teach them to clarify sugar, boil it to different stages, add rosewater and crushed almonds. The holy brothers take to confectionery with unholy enthusiasm, their chants now punctuated by the bubbling of sugar syrups. You perfect the art of medieval pharmaceutical fraud, legally, of course. Everything is medicine if you say it right. Candied ginger for stomach ailments, sure. Sugared violets for melancholy, why not? Marzipan sculptures for spiritual enlightenment? The justifications get increasingly creative. One monk insists his sugar-preserved cherries cure lustful thoughts, though you notice he tests this medicine suspiciously often. The monastery's official records show massive purchases of medical supplies that happen to be sugar, almonds, and pistachios. The secret candy kitchens multiply across religious houses. You help design hidden rooms behind false walls where monks experiment with Arab recipes. They develop their own innovations, hollow communion wafers filled with sweet almond paste, prayer beads that are actually candied fruits, holy water fonts that occasionally contain sugar syrup, quickly corrected after an unfortunate incident during Mass. The competitive spirit between monasteries rivals any guild. Everyone wants to create the most impressive sugar subtlety for the bishop's visit. Your reputation spreads, and soon you're consulting for convents too. The nuns prove even more creative than the monks. Sister Margarita develops a way to spin sugar into edible gold thread. Sister Katharina creates preserved fruits that last years without spoiling. They hide their confectionery experiments better too. Who's going to search a convent for illegal candy operations? The Mother Superior maintains perfect innocence while her storage rooms bulge with sugar worth a king's ransom. The theological gymnastics become Olympic level. You sit through debates where learned churchmen argue whether sugar consumption counts as gluttony. They settle on a complex system. Sugar as medicine is virtuous. Sugar for pleasure is sinful. But sugar for the glory of God, meaning impressive cathedral banquets, occupies a holy middle ground. You watch monks document their sugar work in Latin to make it seem more medical and less delicious. Securum Medicina sounds much more respectable than we made candy again. Competition between religious houses turns cutthroat. You witness the great marzipan incident of 1103, when two monasteries present identical sugar sculptures at a feast, both claiming divine inspiration for the design. The investigation reveals a network of spies in holy robes, stealing recipes between Vespers and Matins. Monks bribe servants, seduce suppliers, and occasionally resort to very unchristian sabotage. One monastery's entire Easter subtlety collapses because rivals paid someone to add too much rosewater to the mixture. The nobles notice the quality of monastery sweets and begin placing orders. Suddenly, you're coordinating between holy brothers and royal kitchens. The monasteries can't officially be in the candy business, so elaborate schemes develop. Nobles donate sugar and almonds, then receive blessed food gifts that happen to be exquisite confections. The accounting gets creative. You help write ledgers where 50 pounds of marzipan appears as devotional objects, edible temporary. Your work expands to teaching preservation techniques. Monks discover sugar keeps their fruit harvest from rotting, extending their food security and profit margins. You show them how to make fruit preserves that last through winter, candied citrus peels that prevent scurvy, and sugared nuts that provide traveling food for pilgrims. Of course, most of these preserved goods mysteriously vanish before any pilgrims arrive, but that's between the monks and their confessors. The sugar knowledge spreads through religious networks faster than any crusade. You carry recipes between monasteries, each one swearing you to secrecy about their special techniques. The Benedictines excel at fruit preservation. The Cistercians master pulled sugar work. The Franciscans somehow develop ice cream centuries early. They claim it's for fever reduction. Every order guards their secrets while desperately trying to steal everyone else's. The moral flexibility required amazes even your medieval sensibilities. You watch an abbot bless a sugar delivery with one hand, while calculating profit margins with the other. Monks who've taken vows of poverty handle sugar worth more than cathedral gold. The mental gymnastics peak when creating subtleties of saints. Is eating a sugar sculpture of St. Francis an act of devotion or delicious blasphemy? The Church decides it depends on your intent while consuming the saint's candy head. The street food revolution begins outside cathedral walls, where you set up a small stall selling hot spiced wine with honey and Eastern aromatics. Your customers, mostly pilgrims and merchants, have never tasted cinnamon or cloves in their drinks. The first sip makes grown men cry, not from the alcohol, but from flavors that transform their usual sour wine into liquid heaven. Within weeks, copycat stalls pop up everywhere, though most use sawdust dyed brown instead of real cinnamon. You can spot the fakes by the coughing customers and occasional splinters. You expand into solid foods, creating primitive versions of what Jerusalem street vendors sold. Your Saracen cakes are just regular bread dough with precious sugar and spices kneaded in, baked until golden. They cost 5 times normal bread, but returning crusaders pay gladly, chasing memories of Eastern markets. You develop a loyal following of knights who swear your honey almond pastries help their battle wounds heal faster. This is complete nonsense, but the placebo effect works wonders on men who believe ground unicorn horn cures impotence. The authorities try to shut you down repeatedly. The Bakers Guild claims you're violating their monopoly. The spice merchants say you're illegally handling controlled substances. The Church worries about infidel corruption spreading through food. You navigate this bureaucratic nightmare by paying bribes to everyone. 10% to the guild, 10% to the merchants, 20% to the church, and somehow still profit because people desperately want food that doesn't taste like medieval sadness. Your success attracts competition and innovation. Street vendors develop portable ovens, wheeled carts with built-in fires for hot food service. Someone invents the medieval food truck, a converted siege engine that now launches delicious aromas instead of stones. The castle guard tries to ban mobile food sales, but nobles override them because they want spiced wine delivered directly to their chambers. You witness the birth of medieval DoorDash, minus the app, but with all the delivery fees. The recipes evolve through customer feedback and creative interpretation. You can't get real Jerusalem ingredients, so you improvise. Rose water becomes elderflower essence. Expensive almonds get stretched with ground chestnuts. When saffron costs more than gold, you use marigold petals and hope nobody notices. The authenticity police, returning crusaders who've appointed themselves guardians of real Eastern food, complain constantly. But hunger for familiar flavors overrides their purism. Class tensions explode in the food scene. Rich merchants' wives send servants to buy your pastries, then serve them at parties claiming they made them. Poor labourers save for weeks to afford one spiced cake for Christmas. You develop a sliding scale, full price for nobles, discounts for Crusader veterans, and sometimes free samples for street children who remind you of your own hungry past. This Robin Hood approach nearly bankrupts you until you realize the nobles' servants are pocketing the difference and splitting it with the poor anyway. The medical establishment gets involved when physicians realize street food provides cover for selling sugar-based medicines. You partner with a barber surgeon who prescribes your honey cakes for melancholy and your spiced wine for cold humors. It's all medical theatre. But people feel better after eating actual flavor instead of boiled turnips. So who's really lying? The Physicians Guild tries to regulate food as medicine, creating the medieval equivalent of FDA approval if the FDA were run by people who thought disease came from bad smells. Your most popular creation becomes Crusader's Comfort, heated wine with Eastern spices, sweetened with honey and served with a small cake that dissolves into the drink. Veterans swear it tastes exactly like something they drank in Antioch. It doesn't, but memory is flexible. The recipe spreads across Europe faster than plague. Though each region claims to improve it, the French add more wine, Germans more spice, Italians more sugar, and the English somehow make it worse despite adding nothing. The street food scene creates its own culture. Vendors develop territorial agreements, secret handshakes, and quality standards. You establish the first food vendor association, mainly to standardize bribes and share information about which officials to avoid. Meeting in tavern basements. You trade recipes like state secrets and complain about customers who expect Jerusalem quality at London prices. The Guild's motto: sweetness to the people, profits to ourselves, and may our spices never be sawdust. Innovation happens through desperation and accident. Running low on honey, you discover that reducing cheap wine with sugar creates a syrup that masks the wine's vinegar notes. Short on almonds, you find that toasted oats with sugar taste almost nutty. When real spices run out, you burn sugar slightly for a caramel flavor that customers prefer to the original. Each shortage births new recipes, proving necessity, mother's invention, and poverty, father's creative seasoning. The sugar sculpture competitions begin innocently enough at the Duke of Burgundy's wedding feast in 1104. You're hired to help create what nobles call subtleties, edible art that makes modern wedding cakes look like peasant bread. The Duke's chef demands a sugar castle complete with edible knights, working drawbridge, and a moat of rosewater syrup. You spend 3 weeks teaching apprentices to boil sugar to hard crack stage without burning it, while the chef screams in French about temperatures you can't measure because thermometers won't exist for centuries. Your first major sculpture catastrophe happens when the Bishop of Rheims commissions a sugar cathedral for Easter. You work with a team of monks who insist on biblical accuracy. The flying buttresses must be load-bearing. The rose window needs coloured sugar glass, and somehow the bells should ring. After 7 attempts, you achieve the impossible, a 4-foot cathedral that stands for exactly 1 hour before humidity turns it into sweet, expensive rubble. The bishop blames demons. You blame April weather and inadequate sugar to tragacanth ratios. The competition between noble houses escalates absurdly. If Count Henri has a sugar swan, Duke Philippe needs a whole sugar aviary. You bounce between castles, teaching kitchens to create increasingly impossible designs. The Duchess of Aquitaine demands a sugar garden of Eden with apple trees that drop candied fruit. The Count of Toulouse wants a sugar tournament with jousting knights whose lances actually break. You develop engineering skills you never knew you needed, using internal armatures of honey-hardened bread and calculating weight distributions like a master builder. Your reputation as a sugar architect spreads, bringing commissions from across Europe. Each patron wants to outdo the last. You progress from simple animals to entire sugar mythologies. For the Holy Roman Emperor's coronation, you lead a team creating a 7-foot dragon that breathes actual fire, achieved by hiding spirit-soaked sugar in its mouth. The creation takes 6 months, costs more than a small army, and exists for exactly one glorious evening before being devoured by drunk nobles who later vomit rainbow colors. The technical challenges push medieval chemistry to its limits. You experiment with different sugar purities, discovering that the whitest sugar creates the most stable structures but lacks flexibility. Adding gum arabic helps, but too much makes everything taste like tree bark. You develop a secret mixture of sugar, egg whites, and mysterious binding agents that creates a moldable paste strong enough to build with. Guards protect your recipe more carefully than state secrets. Industrial espionage is real when your formula is worth a fortune. Social dynamics at sugar sculpture unveilings provide endless entertainment. You watch noble ladies pretend shock at anatomically correct sugar, Adams and Eves, while secretly admiring the craftsmanship. Knights challenge each other to duels over whose sugar castle shows superior architectural prowess. Children of nobility sneak into kitchens to steal pieces, leading to sugar sculptures with mysteriously missing parts. Imagine presenting a Last Supper scene where Judas has been eaten prematurely. The waste appalls your peasant sensibilities. A single competition uses enough sugar to sweeten a village's food for a year. You watch servants sweep up fragments worth months of common wages, mixing priceless art with floor rushes. Some clever servants develop side businesses selling blessed sugar from the Duke's table, essentially floor sweepings marketed to merchants wanting noble glamour. You occasionally help authenticate these fragments, taking your cut while marveling at medieval recycling entrepreneurship. Your greatest triumph comes at the wedding of the French king's daughter. The commission: recreate famous Crusade battles in sugar, complete with edible Jerusalem. You spend months training assistants in advanced techniques, sugar pulling for palm trees, isomalt work for water effects, painted details using saffron and berry dyes. The final display covers 3 tables, showing crusaders storming sugar walls while Saracen defenders pour caramel boiling oil. Historians still argue whether making warfare look delicious counts as promoting peace. The competitions reveal disturbing trends. As nobles compete for grander displays, sugar prices skyrocket further. Common people riot over bread prices, while aristocrats build entire sugar villages for single feasts. You find yourself caught between artistic ambition and social conscience. Your peasant origins scream at the waist, while your artist soul demands bigger, better, sweeter creations. The moral compromise: you secretly teach poor apprentices the skills, knowing they'll use them to lift their families from poverty. By 1106, sugar sculpture competitions become so elaborate they require dedicated venues. Castle halls get rebuilt with special humidity-controlled areas for display. You consult on architectural modifications, windows positioned to prevent direct sunlight, drainage systems for inevitable sugar melts, and reinforced tables for increasingly massive creations. The sugar arms race transforms European noble culture, making feasts without elaborate subtleties seem as shameful as serving plain water instead of wine. Your second career as a barber surgeon begins when you notice wealthy sugar addicts arriving with mouths full of black stumps. The connection between sugar and tooth decay hasn't occurred to anyone yet. They blame evil humors, angry spirits, or insufficient prayer. You set up shop with basic tools, pliers designed for horseshoeing, a leather strap for patients to bite, and strong assistance to hold down the screaming. The irony of fixing problems caused by the very substance that made you wealthy doesn't escape you. But business is business. The dental disasters among nobility reach epidemic proportions. You extract teeth from duchesses who ate marzipan for breakfast, counts who sucked sugar canes like toys, and bishops who claimed their candied fruits were medicinal while their molars rotted away. The extraction process is barbaric. You literally pin patients down while yanking infected teeth with modified blacksmith tools. The screams echo through castle corridors, but nobody stops eating sugar. They just order more, claiming they need it for the pain. Your most illustrious patient, Duke Robert of Normandy, arrives with an abscess that makes half his face swell like a spoiled melon. His diet consists entirely of sugar-preserved fruits, honey cakes, and wine sweetened with enough sugar to crystallize. You explain that perhaps reducing his sugar intake might help. He responds by threatening execution if you don't fix his teeth while changing nothing about his diet. You extract 7 teeth over 3 agonizing sessions while he alternates between screaming and demanding candied ginger for the pain. The medical establishment's understanding of dental health remains spectacularly wrong. University-trained physicians insist tooth decay comes from tiny worms that eat holes in teeth. They prescribe fumigation with burning herbs to smoke out the worms. You've looked at hundreds of rotted teeth and never seen a single worm, but pointing this out gets you labeled a dangerous radical. Instead, you develop your own theories. People who eat more sugar have worse teeth. Revolutionary thinking that nobody wants to hear. You diversify into prevention scams that actually work by accident. Your tooth-strengthening tonic is just mint water with a tiny amount of salt, but it helps because people rinse their mouths after drinking it. Your anti-worm tooth powder contains ground eggshells and herbs. The abrasion actually cleans teeth slightly. Noble ladies pay fortunes for these treatments while continuing to breakfast on candied violets. You're basically running medieval dental damage control while the sugar industry creates job security. The extraction techniques evolve through horrible trial and error. You discover that getting patients completely drunk helps, though some vomit mid-extraction, which creates exciting new challenges. Opium mixed with wine works better, but costs more than most can afford. For the wealthy, you develop a gentle extraction method, which just means you use smaller pliers and work slower while they scream at a lower volume. The poor get the quick yank and pray approach, which honestly might be more merciful. Your practice reveals the shocking scope of sugar damage across social classes. Nobles have it worst. Their unlimited access means unlimited decay. Wealthy merchants' children lose baby teeth to rot before adult teeth emerge. Even clergy suffer despite claims of moderation. You extract so many bishops' teeth you could build a small cathedral from molars alone. The only people with decent teeth are peasants who can't afford sugar. Poverty as dental insurance. The tooth-pulling business leads to unexpected innovations. You develop primitive dental tools from modified jewelry-making equipment, finer pliers for front teeth, specialized hooks for wisdom teeth, mirrors stolen from noble ladies' chambers to see inside mouths. Your assistant invents a head restraint system after being bitten once too often. Another creates flavored leather strips for post-extraction care, soaked in clove oil and wine. It's primitive dentistry born from desperation and too much sugar. The social implications of mass tooth loss among nobility create fashion trends. Toothless duchesses develop affected lisps that become fashionable speech patterns. Knights missing front teeth grow elaborate moustaches for coverage. You're commissioned to create ivory dental pieces, not false teeth exactly. More like tooth-shaped jewelry that does nothing functional but fills gaps during portraits. The sugar epidemic literally changes how European nobility speaks and smiles. By 1108, you're wealthy enough from tooth-pulling to retire. But the irony haunts you. Every extracted tooth represents someone who discovered Eastern sweets through your earlier career. You're simultaneously the drug dealer and the rehab clinic, the cause and cure, profiting from both ends. Some nights you dream of mountains of rotted teeth, all black with sugar decay, accusing you of bringing sweet destruction to Europe. Then you count your gold and sleep better. The spice fraud operations you encounter make modern food tampering look amateur, working as a spice authenticator in London's markets. You discover merchants stretching precious cinnamon with ground oak bark, colouring it with rust and clay. Your trained palate, refined by years of real Eastern spices, catches the deception immediately. The taste of sawdust and disappointment is hard to mask, though desperate customers often buy it anyway, wanting to believe they're eating like Crusader knights. You learn the fraudster's techniques through a combination of bribery and threats of exposure. Pepper, worth literally its weight in silver, gets cut with ground date pits. Mouse droppings, dried and darkened, and tiny pebbles. Saffron, more valuable than gold, is faked with marigold petals, dried grass dyed yellow, or even thin strips of dried meat coloured with turmeric. One creative criminal develops sustainable saffron by mixing one real thread with 99 fake ones. He claims it's homeopathic spicing. Your investigation reveals an entire underground economy. Mills hidden in cellars grind coloured wood into cinnamon. Workshops full of children paint individual peppercorns to look fresher. You find warehouses where they age fake nutmeg in chambers filled with real nutmeg to absorb some aroma. Medieval scent laundering. The sophistication amazes you. These aren't simple criminals, but organized guilds of fraud, complete with apprenticeships in deception. The sugar adulterations prove most dangerous. You test samples that contain ground marble, chalk, white lead, genuinely poisonous. And in one horrifying case, ground bone from the charnel house. The perpetrators show no remorse. They're selling to nobles who exploited them for generations. So poisoning their sweeteners seems like poetic justice. You report the worst offenders to authorities who do nothing unless the victims are important enough. A merchant's wife dies from lead sugar? Unfortunate. A bishop's nephew gets sick. Suddenly, there's an investigation. Your reputation as an authenticator brings dangerous attention. Fraudsters try bribing you to certify their products. When you refuse, they try more persuasive methods. You wake up one morning to find a dead rat in your sugar sample box. A clear message. Your assistant disappears for 3 days, returning with creative bruises and a sudden reluctance to test suspicious cinnamon. You hire bodyguards, then discover they're taking bribes from the very people you're investigating. The authorities' response depends entirely on who's complaining. When common people report fake spices, officials shrug, buyer beware. When the Duke's chef discovers his pepper is half mouse droppings, heads literally roll in. You testify at trials where merchants face hand removal for spice fraud, while watching nobles who knowingly sell contaminated sugar receive mild fines. Medieval justice has a strong correlation with social status and bank account size. You develop increasingly sophisticated testing methods. Real cinnamon oils your fingers when rubbed. Fake leaves them dry. Genuine pepper makes you sneeze in specific ways. Fake irritants don't replicate. Sugar should dissolve completely in water. Residue means additives. You write these tests in code. Knowing fraudsters would pay fortunes for your detection methods. Your notebook becomes valuable enough that you sleep with it under your pillow. Knife in hand. The economics of fraud prove irresistible to many. A pound of real cinnamon costs a month's wages. Fake cinnamon costs nothing to make and sells for half that price. Even exposed fraudsters often escape real punishment by claiming ignorance. They bought it from someone else who swore it was real. The chain of blame stretches so far that finding the original faker becomes impossible. You realize you're fighting an unwinnable war against human greed. Your strangest discovery involves the church's role in spice fraud. Several monasteries, facing financial pressure, begin blessing fake spices to make them real through divine intervention. They argue that faith transforms the substance. If you believe it's cinnamon while receiving communion, doesn't God make it so? The theological arguments get weird fast. You test their transubstantiated spices and confirm they're still just bark and sawdust. Though now, they're holy bark and sawdust. The spice fraud networks extend internationally. You trace fake pepper to Italian merchants who import it from Byzantine suppliers who claim it's from India, but actually grind it in Constantinople basements. Everyone takes their cut while maintaining plausible deniability. The real victims are final customers who pay premium prices for garbage, and honest merchants who can't compete with fraud prices. You watch legitimate spice traders go bankrupt while criminals build mansions from sawdust profits. The manuscript arrives at your London workshop wrapped in oiled leather, carried by a nervous Templar who insists you translate it immediately. Written in Arabic with margin notes in Greek. It's a cookbook from the Fatimid court of Cairo, stolen during the siege of Ascalon. You open it to find not just recipes but an entire culinary civilization. Detailed instructions for Saracen sauce, preserving lemons in salt, and something called sikbaj, a sweet and sour meat stew that makes your mouth water just reading about it. You begin the translation work, struggling with terms that don't exist in Latin or any European language. How do you explain tahini to people who've never seen sesame seeds? What's the Latin for caramelization, when European cooking involves boiling everything until it surrenders? You create new words, borrowing from Arabic, inventing Latin compounds, sometimes just describing the process in painful detail. Take sugar and heat until it becomes the color of autumn oak leaves, becomes your standard for explaining caramel. The recipes reveal a sophistication that humbles European cuisine, where your culture has one word for cook, usually meaning boil until grey. This manuscript describes dozens of techniques: sautéing, braising, glazing, reducing, infusing. You discover the concept of layering flavors, starting with aromatics, building with spices, finishing with herbs. The idea that cooking could be art rather than survival strikes you like divine revelation. Historians still argue whether European cuisine was revolutionized more by spices or by finally learning how to use them. Your first attempt at recreating judhaba, a layered dish of bread, meat, and sweet sauce, nearly burns down your kitchen. The manuscript assumes knowledge you don't have. What heat is like the breath of a content dragon? How long is until the angels would weep from the aroma? You experiment repeatedly. wasting expensive ingredients while your neighbors complain about strange smells. Success finally comes when you realize their poetic descriptions actually contain precise technical information disguised as metaphor. The manuscript's preservation sections astound you most. Europeans preserve through salting, smoking, or prayer, equally effective. These recipes describe pickling in vinegar-sugar solutions, preserving fruits in syrup, creating what they call murri, a fermented sauce that keeps meat edible for months. You attempt making preserved lemons, watching in amazement as salt and thyme transform them into something that tastes like concentrated sunshine. Your first batch molds, your second oversalts, but the third creates flavor bombs that make plain fish taste exotic. Word spreads about your translation work, bringing curious nobles and suspicious clergy. The bishop worries you're spreading infidel corruption through food. You argue that God created spices for all humanity. Surely using them properly honors his creation. The theological debate gets complex when discussing recipes that call for wine, forbidden to Muslims, being translated from a culture that forbids it. You navigate by emphasizing the medicinal properties, though everyone knows medicinal wine sauce is just an excuse for flavor. The illustrated manuscripts prove most valuable. Detailed drawings show knife techniques, pot shapes, and even table arrangements. You realize medieval European feasts are just piles of food compared to the structured service these manuscripts describe. They explain courses, complementary flavors, and the revolutionary idea that not everything needs to be served simultaneously. One illustration shows 30 different ways to cut vegetables. Your mind explodes realizing cutting affects cooking and taste. You establish a copying workshop, employing monks who can illustrate and write. Each manuscript copy costs more than a warhorse, but nobles pay gladly for secret knowledge. You add your own notes, explaining substitutions for unavailable ingredients. When they call for snow of Lebanon, you suggest scraped ice from winter storage. Tears of the phoenix becomes expensive saffron. Some substitutions work brilliantly. Others create disasters that your clients politely don't mention while never ordering that dish again. The recipes begin transforming European court cuisine. You're invited to noble kitchens to demonstrate techniques, teaching cooks who've only known boiling and roasting the art of reduction sauces. Watching a grizzled castle cook discover that browning meat before stewing creates flavor. His face shows religious conversion. You teach the shocking concept of tasting while cooking instead of hoping for the best. Kitchen fires decrease dramatically when cooks learn food doesn't require cremation. The manuscript's dessert section creates a sensation. Beyond simple honey cakes, it describes layered pastries with nuts and syrup, cookies shaped like animals, and something called katief, stuffed pancakes that require actual skill. European nobles go mad for these exotic sweets. Demanding court pastry chefs learn Arabic techniques. You find yourself teaching the physics of phyllo dough to men who thought paste was the height of baking sophistication. The transformation begins in monastery infirmaries, where you observe Brother Thomas grinding almonds with sugar and rosewater to create a smooth paste. For strengthening the sick, he insists, while sneaking spoonfuls himself. This medicinal marzipan tastes suspiciously delicious for medicine. Within months, every monastery develops unique healing confections. Candied ginger for digestion, crystallized violets for melancholy, and sugar-coated anise seeds for breath, though the medical benefits seem secondary to the taste. You watch the evolution happen in real time. Apothecaries who once sold bitter tinctures discover adding sugar makes patients actually take their medicine. Your own shop begins stocking therapeutic sweetmeats alongside traditional remedies. The bishop's physician prescribes sugar-coated pills for everything from gout to grief. When questioned about the medical basis, he cites ancient Greek texts that conveniently support whatever he's already doing. The sugar coating becomes more elaborate than the medicine inside. The Guild of Apothecaries faces an identity crisis. Are they medical professionals or candy makers? The meetings grow heated as traditional healers argue against the sweetening trend. You attend one where a respected physician demonstrates his new panacea, essentially a ball of sugar with a tiny amount of herbs. The purists rage about medical integrity, while everyone else notices his patients keep coming back. Money talks louder than Hippocrates. Your experiments with medical confections push boundaries. You create rose-hip pastilles that actually contain vitamin C. Though you don't know that term, you just notice people who eat them get fewer winter ailments. Your honey whorehound drops genuinely soothe throats. But for every legitimate remedy, you produce 10 that are just candy with medical marketing. Virtue tablets, sugar with mint, for moral strength. Scholars' sweetmeats, sugar with nothing, for improved memory. The placebo effect works wonders when the placebo tastes amazing. The transition from medicine to dessert happens gradually. Then suddenly, noble ladies who take digestive comfits after meals start requesting them during meals, then before meals, then constantly. Children fake illnesses for spoonfuls of healing syrups. You notice your medical confection sales spike during festivals and celebrations. Apparently, many nobles suffer from convenient illnesses requiring sugar treatment whenever there's a party. The church attempts to regulate this grey area between gluttony and medicine. They declare that consuming sweets for genuine medical need is virtuous, but eating them for pleasure is sinful. This creates a boom in medical diagnoses. Suddenly, everyone suffers from weak constitution requiring sugar fortification, or melancholic humours needing sweet correction. You write prescriptions that are basically permission slips for candy consumption. The theology gets so twisted that eating dessert becomes a religious obligation if properly prescribed. Your shop develops a dual identity. The front room displays serious medical equipment and herbs. The back room looks like a candy workshop, with copper pots bubbling various syrups and apprentices rolling pills that are 90% sugar. Customers enter limping and leave with bags of medicine that would make children weep with joy. The pretense fools nobody. But everyone participates in the theatrical performance of medical necessity. The recipes become increasingly elaborate. Simple honey pills evolve into complex confections with multiple layers, colors, and flavors. For medical reasons, of course. You develop a 7 stages of health suite where each layer treats a different humor. It's complete nonsense medically, but the technical achievement impresses everyone. Noble physicians compete to prescribe the most complex remedies, leading to sugar sculptures that require engineering degrees to construct and medical degrees to justify. The economics shift dramatically. Apothecaries who embrace sweet medicine prosper. Those who cling to traditional bitter remedies watch customers flock to competitors. You see honest healers wrestle with conscience versus commerce, usually losing to the latter. One elderly physician tells you he spent 40 years perfecting herbal remedies, only to be outsold by a 20-something who puts sugar on everything. He seems bitter. Ironically, the only flavor that doesn't sell anymore. The medical conferences become surreal. Learned men debate the 4 humors while eating candied orange peel for bile regulation. They present papers on sugar's healing properties while their teeth rot visibly. You attend one where a physician demonstrates 37 different medical conditions treatable with variations of sugar paste. The audience takes notes while discreetly sucking on throat lozenges that are basically candy. Medieval medicine has discovered the spoonful of sugar principle centuries before Mary Poppins. The summer of 1109 brings the first great sugar riot to London. You watch from your shop window as crowds surge through the streets, demanding access to the sweetness reserved for nobility. A journeyman baker holds aloft a small sugar loaf, screaming its price, enough to feed a family for 3 months. The mob responds by storming a Venetian merchant's warehouse. They don't want gold or silver. They want the white crystals that promise a taste of paradise. You recognize faces in the crowd, customers who've saved for months to buy a single candied almond, mothers who've watched their children press noses against your shop window, craftsmen who know the taste of sugar only from licking the packages they deliver to nobles. The riot spreads as word travels that the warehouse holds tons of hoarded sugar, kept scarce to maintain prices. The city watch arrives but hesitates. How do you tell starving people they can't have food that's sitting right there? The violence escalates when merchants hire mercenaries to protect their sweet investments. You see a child struck down for grabbing a handful of sugar. A woman bleeds from a sword cut, clutching a small bag of crystallized ginger. The bishop tries to calm the crowd, preaching about patience and heavenly rewards. Someone throws a turnip at him, the ultimate statement about earthly food inequality. He retreats to his palace, probably to console himself with candied fruits. Your position becomes precarious. As someone who bridges both worlds, selling to nobles while sympathizing with commons, you're trusted by neither during the riot. Nobles demand you defend their property rights. Commoners expect you to open your stores to the people. You choose a middle path, accidentally leaving your back door unlocked while publicly supporting order. If some preserved fruits disappear during the chaos, who's to say where they went? The riot's aftermath reveals the depth of sugar inequality. Authorities hang 3 men for theft of property valued higher than gold. The executed men's crime? Taking sugar that would have rotted in warehouses rather than reaching markets. Their families receive their bodies, but not the sugar they died trying to taste. You attend one funeral where mourners pass around a single date, each taking the tiniest bite in memory of a father who died wanting sweetness. The merchant's response makes things worse. They hire more guards, raise prices further, and create sugar courts where suspected thieves face private justice. You're called to testify about sugar values and watch a child lose a hand for stealing what amounts to a tablespoon of crystallized honey. The judge, meanwhile, sips wine sweetened with enough sugar to feed the child's family for a year. The irony tastes more bitter than wormwood. New black markets emerge from the riot's ashes. You're approached by underground sugar dealers offering people's prices, still expensive but achievable for working folk. The quality varies wildly. Some is real sugar stolen from noble shipments. Some is crystallized honey passed off as the real thing. Some is actively dangerous. You test samples and find everything from relatively pure sugar to compressed sawdust with lead whitening. Desperation makes people buy anyway. The social movements that spring from sugar inequality surprise everyone. Groups form demanding sweet justice, equal access to Eastern imports. They organize boycotts of merchants who hoard, though these fail when addicted nobles pay any price. Some radicals propose communal sugar-buying cooperatives. Others suggest raiding Venetian ships directly. You attend secret meetings where bakers and craftsmen plot revolution. all sparked by denied access to crystallized sweetness. The authorities try various solutions, all failing spectacularly. They establish sugar doles where poor citizens can buy tiny amounts at regulated prices. The queues stretch for blocks, fights break out, and the allocated sugar disappears into black markets anyway. They try price controls, but merchants simply claim shortages while their warehouses bulge. One progressive noble suggests growing sugar locally, not understanding that sugar cane doesn't appreciate English weather. Your own response evolves from sympathy to action. You begin teaching poor apprentices the art of stretching sugar, how to make a pound serve where an ounce should, how to extract every grain of sweetness from processing waste, how to create acceptable substitutes from local ingredients. It's not equal access, but it's something. You develop poor man's preserves using honey, apple must, and tiny amounts of real sugar. They don't taste like true Eastern confections, but they offer sweetness beyond centuries of bland survival. By 1110, you've lived long enough to witness Europe's first obesity epidemic among the wealthy. Lord William of Kent waddles into your shop, his girth requiring 2 servants to help him through the door. He orders his usual, 3 pounds of candied citrus, 2 bottles of rose syrup, and enough marzipan to model a castle. His breathing sounds like a broken bellows, his fingers too swollen for his rings. Yet he insists his weight comes from an abundance of good humours, not the daily sugar consumption exceeding a peasant's yearly intake. You see the transformation everywhere among nobility. Ladies who once prided themselves on willow-thin figures now sport multiple chins and require reinforced chairs. Knights who should mount horses need special platforms and pulleys. Children of nobles develop what physicians call honey sickness. We'd recognize it as childhood diabetes. But medieval medicine blames evil vapors. You watch a 10-year-old duke's son consume his weight in sugared almonds monthly, while his tutors wonder why he falls asleep during lessons. The medical explanations for this epidemic showcase medieval logic at its finest. Physicians declare that nobles gain weight because their refined constitutions absorb nutrition more efficiently. The poor stay thin due to coarse humours that reject good food. Nobody mentions that the poor can't afford sugar. When you suggest diet might influence health, learned doctors dismiss you as a simple tradesman who doesn't understand complex medical theory. Meanwhile, their noble patients literally eat themselves to death. Your position as supplier gives you a front-row seat to grotesque consumption. The Countess of Warwick orders preserved fruits by the barrel, eating them like a peasant would eat bread. Her physician prescribes more sugar to balance her sweetened humours. Medieval medicine enabling addiction through ignorance. You watch her grow from a young bride to an immobile mountain of flesh, carried between rooms on a reinforced litter, still demanding her daily sugar portions between laboured breaths. The clergy faces its own crisis. Gluttony is a deadly sin. But how do you define it when sugar makes everything medicinal? You see bishops who preach moderation while their robes expand yearly to accommodate growing girths. Monastic orders famous for fasting develop interesting definitions. Apparently consuming liquid sugar doesn't count as eating. Abbey kitchens produce fasting syrups that contain more calories than a full meal. The theological gymnastics required to justify sugar gluttony deserve their own scholastic discipline. The social dynamics shift as weight becomes a status symbol. Thin nobles are assumed poor, unable to afford proper sugar consumption. Portraits are painted to emphasize multiple chins and substantial bellies, signs of wealth and access to Eastern delicacies. You're commissioned to create special confections for weight gain, mixing sugar with butter and nuts to pack maximum richness into minimum volume. Parents force-feed children sugared milk to ensure they develop properly portly figures. The addiction patterns you observe mirror modern drug dependencies. Nobles experience withdrawal when sugar runs low, shaking hands, violent moods, desperate cravings. One duke threatens to execute his entire kitchen staff when sugar supplies delay. A duchess pawns family jewels to maintain her candied fruit supply. Children throw tantrums that end only with honey cakes. You realize you're not just selling food, you're dealing an addictive substance to people with unlimited resources and zero self-control. Your attempts to promote moderation meet resistance from all sides. When you suggest smaller portions, customers accuse you of cheating them. When you dilute syrup slightly, they notice immediately and threaten to buy elsewhere. One noble family hires a food taster specifically to ensure their sugar isn't cut with cheaper ingredients. The taster, ironically, is the only thin person in the household. He spits out everything after tasting. The physical consequences become impossible to ignore. Noble feet rot from what we'd recognize as diabetic complications. Teeth fall out in chunks. Hearts give out during mild exertion. Yet the sugar consumption continues accelerating. You attend a feast where the dessert course outweighs all other courses combined. Guests compete to consume more, turning gluttony into sport. One knight dies at table, face first in a sugar sculpture, and the feast continues around his corpse. The economic impact spreads beyond individual health. Noble families bankrupt themselves maintaining sugar habits. Estates that should pass to heirs get sold to pay confectionery debts. You hold IOUs from half the nobility, secured against future harvests and unborn livestock. The Venetian merchants grow rich beyond dreams while European nobility literally eats itself into poverty and early graves. Historians still argue whether sugar addiction contributed to the decline of certain noble lines. The answer is obviously yes. Standing in your London shop in 1115, 20 years after that first taste of dates in Constantinople, you survey an entirely transformed European food landscape. The shelves that once would have held only salt and dried herbs now display rainbow arrays of preserved fruits, spiced wines, and sugar in forms your younger self couldn't have imagined. A peasant child presses her nose against your window, staring at candied violets. Her grandmother would have thought them jewels, not food. You've watched sugar evolve from exotic medicine to luxury, to addiction, to the beginning of democratization. The Venetian monopoly finally cracks as Spanish and Portuguese merchants establish their own trade routes. Prices drop, not to peasant levels, but low enough that successful craftsmen save for Christmas sugar treats. You sell tiny paper cones of crystallized ginger for what a day's wages once bought. It's still inequality, but the gap narrows yearly as European merchants realize volume sales beat exclusive pricing. The cookbook industry you helped create now flourishes independently. Scribes who once copied only religious texts now transcribe recipes full-time. You see merchants' wives trading Saracen sauce recipes like currency, each swearing theirs is authentic Jerusalem style. The cultural fusion creates absurdities: Yorkshire pudding with rosewater, blood sausage with cinnamon, but also innovations that would have amazed both cultures. European cuisine, rescued from its turnip-based depression, develops its own sugar-influenced identity. Your dental practice reveals the democratization of sugar damage. Where once you pulled only noble teeth, now merchants, craftsmen, and even successful farmers arrive with sugar-rotted molars. The equality of dental decay might be history's strangest social leveling. You train apprentices in tooth pulling, knowing the demand will only grow. One suggests trying to prevent decay rather than just treating it. You laugh bitterly. Prevention would destroy both your businesses. The medical pretenses around sugar finally collapse under their own absurdity. Physicians admit what everyone knows. Sugar is food, not medicine, and too much causes problems. Of course, they develop new justifications. Now sugar is necessary for proper digestion, essential for childhood development, or required for mental acuity. The lies change, but consumption continues. You still sell medicinal confections, but now everyone winks at the fiction while buying their stomach remedies that taste suspiciously like candy. The spice trade transforms from exclusive luxury to competitive business. Where once a handful of merchants controlled everything, now hundreds vie for market share. Quality improves as customers learn to discriminate between real cinnamon and bark, actual pepper and dried berries. You write guides teaching people to identify authentic spices, partly from civic duty, mostly because educated customers buy more. The fraud continues but becomes harder as knowledge spreads. New innovations appear monthly. Someone invents pooled sugar techniques, creating edible art that looks like spun glass. Another develops hollow sugar shells filled with liqueur, entertainment and intoxication combined. You see the first candy shops open, specialized stores selling nothing but sweets. Or the guild system struggles to classify them. Are they grocers, apothecaries, artists? They settle on a new category: confectioners, professionals in the art of sugar. The generational changes astound you most. Children born after the Crusades can't imagine food without sugar and spices. They consider plain bread poverty food, demand flavored everything, expect sweetness as birthright. You overhear young nobles discussing preserve quality, like their parents discussed wine. A new vocabulary emerges: crystallization, caramelization, flavor profiles, language that didn't exist in your youth. Europe's palate has fundamentally and permanently changed. The plantations begin in Cyprus and Sicily, attempting to grow sugar closer to European markets. You consult on these projects, teaching what you learn from Syrian prisoners about cultivation and processing. The early attempts fail spectacularly. Sugarcane has opinions about climate, but eventually, through enslaved labor and brutal conditions, Europe begins producing its own sugar. You live long enough to see the beginning of a system that will reshape global economics and human suffering for centuries. Your legacy spreads through trained apprentices, translated manuscripts, and the thousands who learn sugar work in your shops. Former assistants now run successful businesses across Europe. The recipes you translated appear in noble kitchens from Scotland to Sicily. Children who grew up eating your poor man's preserves now create their own innovations. You've democratized sweetness as much as one person can in a feudal system. Though true equality remains centuries away, the transformation is complete. Europe, which began this journey with a cuisine based on survival and suffering, now argues about the proper ratio of sugar to almonds in marzipan. Courts that once served grey meat and brown bread now compete for the most elaborate sugar sculptures. Children who would have grown up knowing only 4 flavors now expect dozens. You've witnessed and helped create a culinary revolution that transforms not just what Europe eats, but how it thinks about food, pleasure, medicine, and social status. But as night falls on medieval Europe's sugar revolution, you sometimes remember that first taste of dates in Constantinople, when sweetness was miracle rather than expectation. You've given Europe a new kind of pleasure, a new form of inequality, and a new way to die. The white crystals that promised paradise delivered something more complex: joy and addiction, medicine and poison, democracy and slavery, all crystallized together like sugar itself, impossible to separate once combined. The candle burns low in your chamber as this tale of sweet transformation draws to its close. Your eyelids grow heavy, weighted with the knowledge of how a simple crystalline substance could reshape an entire civilization. The sounds of medieval London fade. No more clanging from forges, no cries from street vendors selling their spiced wines, no clip-clop of horses carrying sugar-laden saddlebags through cobbled streets. You've travelled from the turnip-flavoured misery of pre-Crusade Europe to the birth of a continent's sweet tooth, witnessed the rise of sugar from medicine to addiction, seen fortunes built on crystallized dreams and bodies destroyed by too much of a good thing. The preserved fruits and candied almonds that seemed like miracles in Jerusalem became commonplace indulgences, available to any merchant with silver to spare. As sleep beckons with its gentle embrace, you might taste phantom flavors on your tongue, the shocking sweetness of that first date, the complexity of properly spiced wine, the guilty pleasure of stolen sugar melting slowly in your mouth. These tastes that revolutionized Europe now seem as natural as breathing, their exotic origins forgotten in the comfortable assumption that food should bring pleasure, not just survival. Tomorrow's historians will argue about sugar's role in everything from colonialism to the Industrial Revolution. But tonight, in this quiet moment between waking and sleeping, you simply rest in the knowledge that sometimes the smallest things, tiny white crystals that dissolve on the tongue, can transform entire civilizations. Your breathing slows, your thoughts dissolve like sugar in warm wine, and you drift into dreams that taste faintly of cinnamon and cost more than a medieval castle. Sweet dreams, traveler. May your sleep be as peaceful as a monk in his sugar-funded abbey, and may you wake refreshed, grateful for a world where sweetness is no longer reserved for the few, even if the price paid for that democracy was higher than any medieval merchant could have calculated.